Former Vice President Mike Pence joins California Politics 360. His thoughts on immigration enforcement in the state, the fight over representation in Congress, and the impact of tariffs on Californians.
American businesses and American families pay American tariffs.
Single-family homes scooped up by corporations. Now a proposed law working to limit the impact.
That bill has stalled in the state Senate.
The renewed interest that could be the driving factor for change. Another refinery halting operations, the second in months. The impact it could have on the price you pay at the pump.
Thank you for joining us for California Politics 360. I'm Ashley Zavala. Ripple effects felt across the country after federal immigration agents shot and killed an American citizen in Minneapolis. The fallout at the center of a federal funding fight in Washington, D.C., and prompting a bunch of anti-ICE proposals here in California. Edie Lambert sat down with former Vice President Mike Pence this week.
Mr. Vice President, thank you so much for joining us for California Politics 360.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. We wanted to talk about starting with immigration, which of course the nation is focused on. And here in California, watchdogs say even this month we're seeing as many as 15 raids a day in Southern California. Should Californians be concerned?
Well, look, the American people have a right to expect that federal and state and local officials will enforce the law. And I would say particularly with individuals that may have crossed our border illegally with criminal intent. I mean, I welcome the efforts that the new Trump administration has made to secure the southern border after the worst border crisis in American history under the Biden administration. But I also appreciate the focus on dangerous criminal illegal aliens that are in our communities. Now, the tragedy that took place in Minneapolis, not once but twice, in police-involved shootings, deserves a full examination, as is warranted in every instance like that. And I think it's important that we respect the right of peaceable assembly, that we respect the freedom of speech rights of people that may object to certain policies. But at the end of the day, I think it's important that we see officials on both sides of the aisle and both parties at every level working together to make sure our streets are safe and the law is enforced.
To the point of talking about First Amendment rights, California could become the first state in the nation to allow citizens to file lawsuits against federal agents and federal officers if their rights are violated, specifically First, Fourth, Fifth Amendment rights. Do you support something like that that's still in play at our state capitol?
You know, I grew up in a family. My uncle was a police officer in Chicago, Illinois, and I have family members that are going into law enforcement as we speak. I think it's really important to understand just how difficult the job is for those who wear the uniform on the thin blue line, and that immunity that exists for law enforcement officers in doing their duty is a very important part of both recruitment and retention, and I think it needs to be preserved. I would caution against any erosion of that immunity. Now, where there is wrongdoing, I think law enforcement officers, like any one of us, should be held to the strictest account before the law. Anytime there's a police-involved shooting, as has occurred now twice in Minneapolis, there ought to be a thorough and full investigation, transparent to the public. But eroding that sovereign immunity that law enforcement enjoys, I think, would not be in the interest of public safety, and I would encourage people to rethink that.
Let's talk about the impact of tariffs here in California. Like many states, we struggle with affordability issues. Our farmers, in particular in this region, have really worried about the tariffs. Where do you feel like a state like California can stand up to that?
Well, you know, during the Trump-Pence administration, we used tariffs as a means of negotiating trade deals, like with South Korea. The USMCA deal, the largest trade deal in history, was built in some respects on the potential for tariffs. But what President Trump has done since Liberation Day is to unilaterally impose tariffs on friend and foe alike. And I think the American people are beginning to awaken in the city and on the farm that despite what the administration has said about foreign companies or foreign countries paying the tariffs, people are realizing more every day that American businesses and American families pay American tariffs. For my part, my hope is that the Supreme Court will soon rescind the president's use of the emergency authority to impose these tariffs. When you look at the Constitution, the power to tax, the power to tariff, belongs to the Congress and to the American people, not to the executive branch exclusively. And while that's changed a bit over the last 100 years in the law, my hope is that the Supreme Court will set that right and give us a fresh start and bring real relief to farmers and to businesses and manufacturers against the weight of these tariffs that have placed a real burden on American families.
Last question, and that is, in your home state in Indiana, the lawmakers declined to redraw political maps mid-decade, but obviously here in California they did. And if we use those maps, Republicans in this state could be down to only 4 districts out of 52. Why do you think on the federal level Republicans haven't done more to fight redistricting here in California?
Well, I would tell you that I always hew to the Constitution. And the Constitution says that the time, place, and manner of federal elections is set by the states. And so I defer to that decision in Indiana. I defer to that decision even here in California. But I think the American people would like to see us move beyond partisan gerrymandering as a rule, and see about creating congressional districts that are more equitable, and let the American people really have a more effective voice. I served in the Congress for 12 years. It is the people's house. It ought to be representative of all the American people, and that the overt partisan gerrymandering, which of course is a long tradition of, has I think tends to result in greater partisanship ultimately in Washington. And at a time when I think our politics is more divided than ever before, I would my hope is, whether it's in the courts or whether it's in the court of public opinion, that we'll let the people decide about the future of the country and our elected representatives more effectively.
All right. Mr. Vice President, thank you so much for joining us here for California Politics 360.
Thank you, Edie. Good to be with you.
Taking aim at the housing crisis, the California proposal to limit how many homes corporations can buy, the challenges this faced in the past, and the factor that could change things this year. California lawmakers are trying to tackle the cost of buying a home in this state. One big way they hope to do that this year is by limiting the number of homes corporations can buy, and it's gaining new support. I sat down with the author of the legislation, Milpitas Assemblymember Alex Lee, earlier this week. Here's part of our conversation. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
I want to start with Governor Gavin Newsom's State of the State this year. He announced that he would like to do more to crack down on corporations who are buying up single-family homes. This is something that you have pitched in the past that has died at the state capitol. Were you surprised to hear that?
I was absolutely surprised, but very pleasantly surprised. So I've been working on limiting the effect of Blackstone-affiliated corporations buying up the American dream, outcompeting people to have single-family homes and have a dream at buying a house. I've been working on that bill for some time. Last year, we got the bill out just barely because of so much lobbying lobbying against it. And then first week in January, I was really pleasantly surprised in the morning to wake up that the President Donald Trump, has announced his support for such a program to curb these corporations from buying single-family homes. And then 4 hours later, Governor Gavin Newsom also said he was going to do the same thing and puts it in his State of the State. And so I'm very, very surprised in all the great ways, and I think it shows how salient this issue is for all Americans.
You said so much lobbying against it.
Yeah.
I acknowledge the president and the governor could be the factor that changes things this year, but who is lobbying against this specifically?
Oh yeah, the corporations that own thousands of single-family homes across America are spending so much money in lobbying, particularly Invitation Homes and Tricon. These companies are the kind of companies that we're trying to crack down on, who have bought swaths of houses after 2011, after the housing bubble. Those are the companies we're trying to crack down on, and those are the same companies that are drawing the ire of President Donald Trump and Governor Gavin Newsom.
What's the status of your proposal now? You've introduced a bill.
Yeah, so AB 1240, which would ban any corporation from having more than 1,000 single-family homes, and I did the 1,000 to kind of just stress how ridiculous that number is, right? It's not grandma and grandpa who have 1,000 houses. No, it's corporations who do this. That bill has stalled in the state Senate, in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and with the renewed interest from the governor and the president too, we hope to be pushing it forward and working with the governor's office, and even now also some Republicans who are more interested in this issue now.
Have you spoken to Governor Newsom directly about this proposal yet, given that he mentioned it in his State of the State?
I talked to his staff, who are very responsive, and I look forward to collaborating with them. They certainly have some other ideas about how to approach this. He mentioned in his State of the State to take a look at the tax code. I know that President Trump is obviously using the Treasury Department to analyze what kind of financial instruments are being used to support and not support these corporate entities. So we've had some good productive conversations with the governor's office, but I think it still remains to be seen what exactly will land on.
Do you have a sense of how many single-family homes are owned by these major corporations?
I do. In America, there could be millions of these. I don't remember the exact number right now, but there are 3 known corporations in California that already own more than 1,000. Invitation Homes alone, just as an example, they own 11,000 houses in California. And many of those actually are concentrated in the Sacramento area. There's a really great map from the Sacramento Appraiser that actually puts out all these pin dots, and you can see all the houses they own. And you can see that almost whole neighborhoods, some streets, there could be 2 houses owned by Invitation Homes that they rent out, all within the same city. And this is true for mostly starter home cities. You know, for myself as a San Jose person, many of my friends, they flee and go over to the Valley, or they go to Sacramento and look for cheaper housing, right? This is the same place that the corporations are competing for, because for their bang for their buck is, and Invitation Homes, a Blackstone affiliated corporation, they said that they look specifically for markets with high rent growth potential, which means places they can jack up the rent. And so they look for the starter home places where you're probably also trying to compete for a house, and they have a hyper concentration there, which also has, I suppose, some market manipulation factors, which interestingly enough is what Trump's DOJ is looking at, because he wants the DOJ to look at if there is an antitrust or market manipulation factors from these corporations. And it is in California too, but they also operate in the Sun Belt, in the South, and the East Coast. So these are national companies that could be possibly owning millions of houses.
I also talk with Assemblyman Lee about the proposed wealth tax in California. He's pushed for similar measures in the past. His response to the argument the tax would push billionaires out of the state. Our full conversation is on CalPolitics360.com. Well, Valero winding down operations, the second refinery to shutter in a matter of months. I sit down with the president of the Western States Petroleum Association about those impacts. California is bracing for another refinery to stop producing gasoline. The Valero refinery in Benicia is planning to idle operations by the end of April. It's the 6th largest refinery in the state, producing almost 10% of the crude oil in California. That's 145,000 barrels per day. This is the second refinery to stop producing gasoline in California. Phillips 66 shut down its Los Angeles area refinery late last year. The two together accounted for 20% of the state's total refining capacity. I sat down with the president of the Western States Petroleum Association. The group represents the oil industry at the state capitol. Here's part of our conversation. Jody, we really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Jody, I want to start with the Valero facility. Governor Gavin Newsom has said that that refinery in Benicia is expected to sit idly. And his office seems to interpret that as that there's a chance that production could begin again at some point. I mean, is that how you see it right now?
That is not my understanding. Really, the state failed to save Valero. And it's unfortunate because they do represent a market share here in California that we could use. Demand is not going down.
In terms of even sitting idly, I mean, what would it take to get a facility back up and running if there was even the slightest chance? I know you're saying there's not, but just what would restarting an idle facility look like?
Yeah, in talking to my members, it is a very complicated process. And once something is shut down, restarting it, it's not like flipping a switch. So it would take a large amount of time, effort, money, and finding the workforce, because the workforce is now going to find other jobs and go out and, look elsewhere. So it's very complicated, and the supply into the refinery would have to be restarted. So there are a lot of logistical challenges to making that happen.
More than 90% of the cars registered in California still rely on gas in some form. And with the idling of the Valero facility, with the shutdown now of Phillips 66, what does this mean for gas prices and the cost of goods overall in this state moving forward?
It's concerning. Consumers should be very concerned. We are concerned. The demand, the most recent statistics I've seen on demand is it's gone down about 1% every year for the last 5 years. So not much. Yet we are now impacting the supply. And it is a very tight balance that we have in this market. The economics of it, it really truly is supply and demand. So we are now taking away some of that supply. And it seems that the state is looking more and more toward an import model, which is very risky.
Risky why?
If there's any type of disruption along that supply chain, it could have dramatic effects and be a supply crunch.
In terms of like an international situation, any kind of war or, right?
Absolutely. Any geopolitical issue that pops up, you're just leaving your energy supply up to others, whether that's another state or another country.
We also talk about the impacts of other state policies she's worried could put the state's oil and gas situation further at risk. A full interview with Jody Mueller is on the Cal Politics 360 website. It's calpolitics360.com. We are days away from Winter Olympics in Milan Cortina. Next, a look at California's role in shaping the Olympic Games. This week, the world will come together for the 2026 Milan Cortina Winter Olympics. Deirdre Fitzpatrick shows us California's history in the Olympics.
California has a long history of hosting the Olympic Games. In 1932, LA hosted its first Summer Olympics. 1,300 athletes took part in the 10th Olympiad. Before these games, the Summer Olympics used to be a months-long competition, but Los Angeles cut it to 16 days, and it's remained anywhere from 15 to 18 days ever since. Another first was having the winner stand on a podium with the flag of the winner being raised. American Helene Madison swept her events in the 1932 Summer Olympics, and she helped Team USA win the 4x100 meters freestyle relay, which is what you were looking at just there. This was the only Olympics that Madison ever actually got to compete in. Fast forward now to 1960, Northern California hosts its first Winter Olympics. Men's biathlon and women's speed skating made their Olympic debuts. But a key sport was actually missing. The International Olympic Committee says that the organizing committee refused to build a bobsled run because only 9 countries were taking part. The 1960 Olympics are the only games where bobsled was not included in the Olympic program. And then finally, the 1984 Summer Olympics back in Los Angeles. The previous Summer Olympics had some big money problems. So Los Angeles ended up being the only city to bid to host the games. The International Olympic Committee says that they relied heavily on the existing facilities and corporate sponsors. But Los Angeles was actually able to make a $223 million profit And this then became a strategy for host cities in future Olympics. At the 1984 Olympics, Joan Benoit won the first ever women's marathon. Synchronized swimming and women's cycling road race also made their Olympic debuts. The Olympics will be back in California in just 2 years. Los Angeles will host the Summer Olympics for a third time. Flag football and squash will be making their Olympic debuts. Back to you, Ashley.
All right, thanks, Deirdre. And thank you for joining us for this week's California Politics 360. See you next Sunday.